They were screaming beneath the soil, but no one in Millfield could hear them, not because the earth was thick, but because the town had learned to sleep with its ears closed. For 50 years, the Hardin family had been hailed as saints in southeastern Kentucky. But saints don't dig tunnels beneath their farm, and they certainly don't line the walls with bones. This isn't folklore. This is the kind of truth carved into sealed ledgers, hidden inside burned courthouses, and whispered by dying men who begged not to be buried too deep. Because in 1778, the people of Beaver Creek learned that what feeds you can also consume you whole. They called it charity. They called it Christian. They called it a farm. But men walked in and did not walk out. And for decades, the land was unnaturally rich. Not from corn, but from something darker, something soaked into the soil that crops should never grow from. You can smell it in the wood of the surviving beams, that iron rot smell, like old blood and silence. There are things you were never meant to know, because if you knew them, you wouldn't just question history. You'd question the systems that taught you to trust it. This isn't a tale about murder. This is a blueprint of manipulation, the kind so elegant, so holy in appearance, that the only sin was noticing. So ask yourself, how does a man of God bury travelers and sleep beside his Bible? Why do some family farms produce more wealth than seems humanly possible? And why, in 1987, did a county clerk who opened one forgotten file vanish 3 weeks later with no explanation and no body? You were trained to believe evil wears horns, but the real monsters wear aprons, smile at their neighbors and leave no bruises, only empty chairs and closed caskets. And if you think this is just about Kentucky, you're not ready for what's coming next, because the Hardin family weren't just killers, they were part of something. You've been taught to believe history is a story of progress. But what if history is a cover story? What if the people you were told were builders, founders, protectors, were actually architects of something unspeakable? 1778 was a year soaked in war and desperation. The American Revolution burned along the east. But in the frontier, something colder was happening, not loud battles, but quiet disappearances. And in southeastern Kentucky, those vanishings converged on one point, the Hardin farm, 300 acres of rich land tucked just off the wilderness road, a perfect place to rest, to disappear, to be devoured. Ezekiel Hardin didn't look like a killer. He looked like a preacher, because he was one, a towering man with a voice like thunder and a Bible clutched in calloused hands. His sermons were known across the region, not for their mercy, but for their judgment. He spoke of cleansing, of purging sin from the land. And when you understand what he believed needed cleansing, you begin to see what that farm really was. Not a home, but a trap, a station in a hidden system stretching far wider than Kentucky, a system that required blood, regularly, an offering disguised as hospitality. And it worked because no one questioned goodness, especially not frontier goodness, because on the edge of civilization, every kind face is a lifeline. The Hardins offered food, medicine, and prayer. They were the saviors of lost travelers, until those travelers never reached their next stop. No blood on the doorstep, no screams in the woods, just a growing guest book, and a growing silence, because you don't need to use force when you use faith. You don't need a weapon when you hold a pulpit. And by 1790, families were routing their journey to pass through the Hardin farm. They thought they were finding rest. They were entering a design, because the Hardins weren't acting alone. The deeper you go into the records, the more They told the townsfolk it was a root cellar. But root cellars don't have iron doors. They don't echo when you walk inside, and they don't lock from the outside. The original plans for the Hardin homestead show 3 outbuildings. But when the clerk opened the blueprints in 1987, there was a 4th, buried deep into the limestone beneath the eastern barn. No official record, no county tax notation, just hand-drawn measurements and one chilling phrase scratched in the margin, for preservation of the unseen. It wasn't food they were storing. It was people, but not in the way you think. Not hostages, not victims. Not at first. They were guests, lulled into peace, fed warm meals, given soft beds, until they were asked to help, just for a moment, to carry something down into the cellar, to hold a lantern, to help Ezekiel perform one of his rites of thanksgiving. It sounded harmless, even spiritual, and once they entered that stone chamber, they never came back out. What happened inside is still debated, because no bodies were ever officially recovered, only fragments, bone shards buried in concrete, rust-stained prayer robes, and beneath them, deeper still, were the etchings, symbols older than Latin, script burned into stone as if by heat, not hand. Who carved them? The Hardens? Or were they simply following instructions? You see, the family claimed to flee Indian raids in Virginia, but there are no records of any such attack. No graves of neighbors, no burned houses. Just the Hardens arriving with money, books, and a map of the valley already marked. So how did they know where to settle? Why was that precise patch of land chosen when better farmland existed just 5 miles east? Unless the land itself had already been selected by something older than the Hardens, and something that required them, as caretakers, as harvesters, as priests of a doctrine no one dared name, because what the Hardens built wasn't just a... When travelers vanished in 1798, the sheriff didn't go alone. He brought 3 men, armed, trusted, loyal. They arrived at the Harden farm at dusk, and by dawn, only the sheriff returned. His statement: no cause for concern. The family is godly. The road is dangerous. No further questions, no searches, no mention of the missing deputies. They were simply forgotten, and that's how the system works, not by silencing with force, but by replacing memory with fear. It wasn't just the farm. It was the town. Millfield wasn't blind. It was complicit. The mayor's daughter was seen dining at the Harden table weeks after her engagement was mysteriously canceled. A local blacksmith who asked too many questions found his forge burned to the ground. While the fire brigade prayed instead of responded, even the Reverend Ephraim Cole, the Harvard man, stopped preaching judgment and began quoting Ezekiel's sermons verbatim, but the shift was subtle. It always is, because people don't wake up and serve darkness. They're eased into it, one moral compromise at a time, one favor owed, one silence bought, and soon the town became a mechanism, a shield around the farm. Because if they admitted something was wrong, they'd have to face how long they'd ignored it, and what they'd benefited from, because Millfield grew richer too. The inn was always full. The general store tripled its revenue, and no one seemed to ask where the extra goods came from. It was easier to believe the Hardens were just generous, that their guests simply chose not to continue on. Even easier when you realize the town was built on their donations. The church pews, carved from cedar donated by Ezekiel, the schoolhouse. Paid for in full by temperance. When power cloaks itself in generosity, it doesn't need to hide. It gets celebrated. And by the time anyone suspects, it's already too late. Because now you're not just revealing a crime, you're threatening a... The deeper you dig into this story, the more it starts to feel like a performance, not a crime of passion, but a ritual of design, because something about the Harden farm doesn't line up with normal murder. This wasn't chaos, this was choreography. And if you look at the records closely, the guest book Mercy Harden kept so meticulously, you begin to notice a pattern. Disappearances didn't happen at random. They happened on specific dates, dates that align with old calendars, not Gregorian, but pre-Christian, aligned with the solstices, the equinoxes, the cross-quarter days known in Druidic rites, February 2nd, May 1st, August 1st, October 31st, 4 disappearances each year, every year, for 20 years. What kind of family disappears a traveler every quarter like clockwork? Not one motivated by greed, but by offering. You're not harvesting crops, you're harvesting people, for something you believe watches, judges, rewards. And by 1801, the farm had grown unnaturally prosperous. Their cattle never got sick. Their fields never flooded. Lightning struck every hill but theirs. It was as if the land was protected, shielded, fed. And if you think this was just one deranged family, then explain this. When the Harden children married, not one of their spouses came from Millfield. Each one arrived from out of state, each one with no known family. Each one vanished from historical record 5 years later. No birth records, no graves, just gone. And all 3 marriages took place on the exact same date, May 1st, Beltane, the day the ancient world honored blood, fire, and fertility. Coincidence doesn't explain that. It's coordination. And this is what I need you to see. This wasn't about hiding evil. It was about embedding it, turning it into tradition, making it sacred, so the system could continue, unchallenged, unnoticed, until someone, you, decided to look. So if you're still listening, you're already different. You're not part. The deeper we go, the colder it gets, not because of fear, but because truth has a temperature, and you're about to feel it. In 1803, a traveling circuit judge named Elias Braith claimed to have uncovered something disturbing during a stop at the Hardin farm. He never published his findings. He never returned to court. He was found hanging from a tree outside Bardstown with no marks of struggle, no signs of resistance, just a note pinned to his chest that read, "The law is beneath the soil." It was ruled a suicide, but his journal was missing 23 pages, and the remaining entries mention only one name again and again, Mercy, not Ezekiel, not Temperance, but their daughter, the one everyone described as sweet, modest, God-fearing. She was always present when guests arrived, always the one who offered warm bread, clean sheets, and gentle laughter. She was the bait. But there's something more, because among the few surviving sketches of the Hardin property, drawn by Braith himself, is a symbol etched above the farmhouse door. It doesn't appear in any known Christian archive, but it does appear in pre-Canaanite tombs. It's older than language, and it translates roughly as, "The offering is joyful." So ask yourself, why would a family hide an ancient death sigil in plain sight, unless it was a seal, a signature, a claim of rightful domain over what entered their gates? Travelers didn't just die on that land. They were given. They were prepared. And if you've read the recovered pages of Reverend Cole's final sermon, the one he never delivered, he confirms it. He wrote, "What we call salvation is built atop a pit, and she, the girl with ash-colored hair, is its mouthpiece." Mercy was never just a daughter. She was an avatar, a bridge between worlds, a woman who, from the age of 10, could quote passages no Bible held, who bled every spring, and never bore a scar, who stood in the center of that root. When Mercy disappeared in the spring of 1805, the town didn't grieve. They celebrated, quietly, subtly, the way people do when a storm passes and the trees are still standing. There was no funeral, no search party, only an announcement posted in front of New Jerusalem Church. "Our daughter has ascended into purpose. The land will now rest." And for a while it did. No disappearances, no strange lights over the creek, no more sermons about cleansing seasons. But silence doesn't mean safety. It means preparation, because something like this doesn't end. It migrates. It waits. And what happened next proves it wasn't just about the Hardin family. It was about the framework they operated within. In 1811, a similar pattern emerged in Meade County. Another family, another farm, same structure, same dates, same disappearances. But this time, the travelers were bound for a new trade route, the Lusk Trace. And just like before, the victims were out-of-towners, alone, easy to erase. And the family? The Blackthorns, a name never connected to the Hardins by blood, but traced in the same land grant system signed by the same judge who once exempted the Hardin property from property tax due to its religious function. It was a phrase used over and over again to shield land from inspection, to mask rituals as sacraments, to reclassify human disappearance as divine absorption. The state saw a worship site. But what was being worshipped was not God, not the God you think. And those judges, those clerks, those ministers, they weren't complicit by accident. They were rewarded. Their descendants still hold office, still govern towns whose names don't appear on most maps, and the old roads that once led to farms like Hardin's. They've been paved over, but they're still marked with mileposts that bear no numbers, only etched sigils if you look close enough. And if you follow them, you don't find old H. In 1817, a land assessor named Corwin Tate filed an unusual report with the state office in Frankfort. He'd been assigned to verify tax values in the counties surrounding Beaver Creek. Routine work. Except what he found was anything but routine. He reported multiple properties with no visible owners, no tenants, no crop records, no receipts, but their taxes were paid in full, on time, every year in coin, not barter, not script. Coins stamped with the year 1778. Freshly minted, untarnished. Tate's report ended with a single line. Payment without presence suggests possession of another kind. He was fired within the month. 2 weeks later, his house burned down. His body was never found. Only his boots, placed upright on his porch, facing east, as if waiting for him to return. This is how these systems protect themselves. With symbols, with erasure, with precision. You see, when evil is obvious, it can be stopped. But when it's wrapped in law, woven into economy, masked as charity, it becomes untouchable. And this is where we face the hardest truth. The Hardin farm was never the origin. It was a node, an outpost, part of a network older than Kentucky, older than the colonies, maybe older than the land grants themselves. A network that has learned to hide in the folds of religion, to weaponize hospitality, to sanctify predation. They use language like cleansing and renewal. They hold seasonal feasts that coincide with national holidays. And they never call it sacrifice. They call it stewardship. The caretaking of something vast and hungry, and the records are there. If you know where to look, cemetery plots with no names, only initials. Churches with basements they won't let you enter. Old family Bibles with pages ripped out between generations. And land, always the land, passed down without sale, untouched by market, guarded by families who speak little and smile much. So ask yourself, when you drive past an old far, and see a private property sign, hand-carved in cedar, what are they really keeping out? Or more importantly, what are they keeping in? Because the system isn't gone. It just changed clothes. And the ones who know its true name, they don't sleep easily because they know what the soil remembers and what it demands to stay quiet. By 1822, whispers had reached Washington, not about murders, but about missing census counts. Entire households along the Wilderness Road were failing to report. Men who had purchased land and never claimed it. Women who had letters mailed to them but never replied. Children born, baptized, then erased. The government sent a man named Eli Hammond, a statistician, not a soldier. He was chosen because he didn't ask questions, but Hammond wasn't a fool. He traced 47 names that had last been recorded within 30 miles of Millfield. All of them passed near or through lands once owned by the Hardins. He documented every road, every junction, every abandoned cabin. He made maps, charts, logs. And then, one day, he stopped writing. His final journal entry was dated November 2nd, 1822. It reads, "They built the cellar not for hiding, but for holding. I hear her humming at night. Not mercy, something else, something beneath." He was found dead 3 weeks later, not in the woods, not in a well, but seated in a pew at New Jerusalem Church, eyes open, lips sewn shut with horsehair. No sign of struggle, no blood, just silence. They called it natural causes, a heart attack. But his autopsy report vanished, along with his journal, except for one page, smuggled out by a clerk who later went blind. That page detailed symbols etched into boundary stones on the edge of the Hardin property, the same ones later found in caves across Kentucky, carved deep and wide, all pointing in the same direction. Down. You have to understand, this isn't superstition. This is engineering. The rituals, the disappearances, the wealth. They're symptoms of a structure, one that lives beneath bureaucracy, beneath belief. And when you look into it long enough, it begins to look back. Because something has been here longer than law, longer than memory, and it feeds not just on flesh, but on obedience. It doesn't want your soul. It wants your silence. And a century. It's been fed well, but every system fails, eventually. And some say the failure began the moment mercy disappeared. Because now, it's not just feeding quietly. It's waking, and the land itself is beginning to shift. In 1831, an earthquake rattled eastern Kentucky. Not a large one, just enough to crack the foundation stones of the old hardened barn. The current owner, a man named Whitlow, claimed he heard music, not the wind, not animals, music, low and rhythmic, drums, pipes, and something like a woman's voice humming beneath the floorboards. He pried them up that night, found the original stone lid of the hardened root cellar, still sealed, still cold, still marked. But one symbol was missing, the center glyph, the anchor, as if it had been lifted or released. And that's when the animals started disappearing, not just from Whitlow's farm, from all across Beaver Creek. Goats, cattle, dogs, even birds, gone. No blood, no tracks, just silence. The people whispered again, not about Ezekiel, not about mercy, but about the soil. How it smelled different, how nothing grew right. Corn stalks twisted, fruit rotted early, and people began to leave. They said it was the economy, bad weather, nothing more. But those who stayed knew better. They spoke of dreams, all the same. A staircase descending into blackness, and a door at the bottom made of breathing wood. Whitlow abandoned the farm in 1833. Left without warning. Didn't even pack the barn, the house, the tools. All left as if time had frozen. No one bought the land, no one dared. It sat empty for 67 years, until the government claimed it under eminent domain, said it would be used for agricultural experiments. But no experiments were ever published. No equipment was ever delivered. And the farmhouse burned to the ground 2 days later. Official cause, lightning. But the sky had been clear. Witnesses say the fire burned cold, blue, without smoke, as if it wasn't consuming wood, but purging memory. And that's the point. This isn't just about murder. This is about forgetting. They don't just bury bodies. They bury the record. Because if no one remembers, then it never happened. And if it never happened, they called it reclaimed land, but reclaimed by who and for what? In 1901, after nearly 7 decades of silence, a federal research team arrived to assess the hardened property for agricultural potential. That's the story the papers told. What they didn't say was that the team wasn't from the Department of Agriculture. It was from a division that no longer exists, the Bureau of Esoteric Land Use. Its records are sealed, its personnel unnamed, but fragments survive in archived telegrams and misplaced ledgers, and what they found, or uncovered, was not fit for scientific language. Their final report, marked "not for public distribution," contains phrases like inverted growth pattern in root systems, magnetically resistant limestone slabs, auditory hallucinations localized to subsurface voids, and one handwritten addition scribbled in the margins. We dug too deep. We heard it breathing. 2 team members resigned within the week. One was institutionalized. The lead archaeologist vanished from all records, erased like so many before, and the land, declared unfit, filed under spiritual hazard. Do you understand the weight of that? The United States government marked the land not as toxic, not as radioactive, but as spiritually hazardous. What agency uses that language? What does that even mean in a nation built on reason? It means they knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to keep people out. Enough to stop calling it a farm and start calling it what it was, a fracture, a mouth, a place where something was buried, not to preserve it, but to keep it from spreading. But nothing buried stays buried forever. Not when it's fed for decades, not when it's been worshipped, and not when the soil remembers every name that fed it. Because what grows beneath doesn't die, it waits. And in 1912, during an unseasonal drought, a photographer wandered too close. He was never found, but the photo plate survived. There's a reason local maps stopped marking the Hardin land after 1920, not because it was sold, but because it was erased, not legally, not formally, erased in the way that makes people forget it was ever there. Roads renamed, property lines redrawn. Neighbors told never to speak of it again, and they obeyed. Not because of fear, but because of memory. Because even decades later, those who lived near Beaver Creek claimed they still heard voices at night, voices beneath the fields, voices in the corn rows, soft and kind, calling by name, and the children. They saw things they never should have seen, figures at the window, a barn that appeared only in dreams, and the girl, always the girl, smiling with ash-colored hair, mercy, but not mercy. Something wearing her face like a favorite garment, something patient, something hungry. One boy, age 7, vanished for 3 days in 1933, returned barefoot and shaking, nails broken, mouth full of dirt. He never spoke again, not a single word, but he drew, over and over, a spiral staircase made of teeth, descending into darkness, and a phrase at the bottom, written backward, "We are the yield." Do you understand what that means? This was never about taking lives. It was about growing something, a harvest, not of crops, of souls, of lineage, of silence. The land doesn't care about your laws or logic. It remembers blood, and it rewards those who feed it. That's why those who protect the truth never survive. Whistleblowers, historians, even genealogists who trace the wrong names. They vanish, or are discredited, branded unstable, accidents, suicides, heart attacks in men too young to suffer them, the price of proximity. And it continues, because we let it, because it's easier to believe it's folklore, easier to believe it's myth. But the moment you feel that tightening in your chest, that cold weight behind your eyes, that's not fear. That's memory waking up because maybe part of you always K. By 1946, post-war America was obsessed with rebuilding, rebirth expansion. Men came back from battle seeking land, peace, and future. The government offered homesteads cheap, including parcels near Millfield, land once marked forbidden, now rebranded as opportunity. One such man was Howard Ellison, a decorated infantryman, 2 Bronze Stars, 3 bullet wounds. No fear left in him. He purchased 18 acres bordering the old Hardin property, built a modest cabin, planted tomatoes and corn, tried to forget what he'd seen in Europe. But the land wouldn't let him, because Howard began hearing something the moment he broke ground. Not voices, rhythms, drumming deep in the earth, not loud, not chaotic, steady, deliberate. He chalked it up to stress, combat trauma, until the pattern started matching his own heartbeat. And when it stopped, his heart did too. Twice, doctors revived him. Both times he woke up screaming the same words. She's not gone. She's down. Who was she? Howard couldn't say, didn't know. But every night he drew her, pale girl, black eyes, teeth too flat, too many. And behind her, always, the barn, the same barn that had burned to ash before his birth. How did he know its dimensions exactly? Its shadow length, its door count, its weather vane, twisted into the shape of a spiral. The same spiral carved onto his shovel handle one morning, a carving he swore he didn't make. And that's when the soil stopped accepting seed. Nothing grew, no matter the effort, and what did emerge was twisted, roots that curled in on themselves, corn husks full of dry powder, tomatoes that bled when sliced. Neighbors said he'd gone mad, but they never spent a night on his land, never heard the footsteps on the porch or saw the girl in the trees. Smiling with hands too long, neck too still, Howard lasted 3 more years. Then one morning, he walked into town, eyes blank, clothes soaked in creek water, and said just one thing, "Oui, oui." In 1962, a team of geologists from the University of Kentucky petitioned to conduct a seismic study near Beaver Creek. Officially, it was part of a broader survey to locate oil reserves. But their real interest wasn't petroleum. It was the anomaly, a subterranean void, 17 meters below the surface, irregular in shape, too structured to be natural, too ancient to be man-made. And when they sent the ground-penetrating sonar down, they didn't hear echoes. They heard resonance, like something alive responding. They never published their findings, because 2 weeks after that scan, the lead researcher, Dr. Gordon Mays, was found in his lab with both eardrums ruptured. No sign of trauma, no wounds, just blood pooling from the ears. His final notes scrawled in graphite across the walls. It speaks through pressure, not words. Every silence is a sentence, and chillingly, "Do not listen at 3:07 a.m. It opens then." The rest of the team resigned, citing unrelated reasons. Their equipment was seized, the files classified, and the location paved over, turned into a forestry station that never staffed more than one man, who rotated monthly. None of them stayed longer than 30 days, not because of fear, but because they started changing. One grew allergic to sunlight. Another forgot his own name. A third began speaking in broken Latin during sleep, words no one taught him, but which matched the old symbols carved on hardened stone. Phrases like, "I preserve for the eater," and "yielded flesh returns tenfold." So ask yourself, why does no modern construction exist on that land? Why have power lines never been run through it? Why does no cell service exist for exactly a 1-mile radius around the original hardened property? Because interference is protection. The signal is not just electromagnetic. It's ancient, primordial. And silence is not an absence of noise. It's a command, a requirement. That's why people get. In 1979, a local archivist named Eleanor Wicks uncovered a set of unmarked documents in the basement of the Millfield County Courthouse. No titles, no stamps, just bound pages, old paper, charred at the edges. What she found should have changed Kentucky history, but instead, it nearly destroyed her life. The documents detailed court records from 1806 to 1814, buried under land disputes, hidden in agricultural files, but what they described was no ordinary trial. They were transcripts, testimonies, descriptions of something called the Communion of the Root, an event held quarterly, always under new moon, always following a disappearance. The names of attendees weren't outsiders. They were town elders, reverends, sheriffs, midwives, people sworn to protect the community, and yet they gathered at the old cellar to witness, to agree, to consume. Wicks published portions of the transcripts anonymously in an academic journal based out of Tennessee. Within 2 weeks, the journal shut down. Funding pulled, editor fired. She tried again, uploading the documents to a primitive online archive. The files vanished within 48 hours. Her house was broken into, nothing taken except one item. The original guest book from the Hardin family farm. That book contained names, hundreds, some with bloodlines that still exist, bankers, judges, even politicians. She contacted 2 descendants. Both died within a month, one from a hunting accident, the other in a hotel fire with no known ignition source. After that, Wicks vanished from public life. Friends said she stopped answering calls, moved somewhere out west. But the most disturbing part? The last image we have of her, captured on a trail camera outside her Kentucky cabin. She's standing at the tree line, face pale, eyes open too wide, and behind her, just visible through the branches, a figure, tall, thin, head bowed, hands not touching the ground, and a grin, the same grin Mercy wore in every retelly. By the late 1980s, interest in the Hardin land had all but disappeared. It wasn't mentioned in school books, not featured on local tours. Even the oldest locals, the ones who remembered its name, would only speak of it as a joke. But jokes are masks, and silence is inheritance. Until 1987. When a board clerk named Jordan McCrae stumbled into the archive basement during renovations. He was just looking for dry storage. What he found was a wooden crate, stamped with wax seals from 1841. Inside, ledgers, receipts, handwritten letters, and a single iron key, heavy blackened, still warm to the touch. One letter was addressed to a judge in Lexington. It read, "The cellar has been fed. The ledger closed. We await the next tide." Another letter was unsigned, written in code. One Wicks had already cracked years before. It referenced coordinates, lunar phases, and an entity referred to only as the mouth beneath. Jordan reported it to his supervisor. By morning, the crate was gone, and so was Jordan. His apartment abandoned, no sign of struggle, no personal belongings missing, but on the mirror, scrawled in grease pencil, one phrase: it doesn't want to be found. It wants to be remembered. 3 days later, every document related to the Hardin family in the state archive system was reclassified as sensitive spiritual folklore, access denied, searches rerouted, and an internal memo circulated with a chilling directive: do not pursue further inquiries related to the 1778 disappearances. Any connection to modern families or properties is coincidental and legally irrelevant. But here's the question: if it's irrelevant, why redact it? If it's folklore, why classify it? Because some truths aren't buried, they're planted, cultivated, grown into institutions. And like all things grown, they bear fruit. The Hardin story is not a standalone horror. It is the root system, invisible, interconnected, spreading beneath the fee. By 1995, the Hardin story had faded again, not into obscurity, into strategy, because once a system like this is uncovered too many times, it doesn't go dormant, it evolves. And that's when the foundation stepped in, not a charity, not a nonprofit. That's just branding. Officially, they called themselves the Continental Heritage Trust, their mission: preserving historical rural land for future generations. But their acquisitions were surgical. Every purchase was centered around known occult sites, forgotten farmsteads, abandoned creeks, always with one condition: do not disturb the seller, and always signed by board members with surnames that traced back to Hardin's original guest book, Whitlow Crane Cole. You think that's coincidence? You think a random land trust just happens to reclaim the most spiritually hazardous soil in the state? No, this was retrieval, this was harvest control, and the records show something worse. They didn't just buy land, they bought silence, libraries, historical societies, private collectors, all paid off or absorbed. One whistleblower, a cartographer named Stephen Pike, went public in 2003. He showed maps, overlays, how old sacrifice routes aligned perfectly with new fiber optic cable paths. He said, they're digitizing the ritual. They don't need bodies anymore, just bandwidth. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Single car accident, no skid marks, no passengers, just a charred hard drive in the back seat, files unreadable. So now you ask, what does it want? Why all this? Why the secrecy, the blood, the careful preservation of one cursed plot of land in Kentucky? Because belief is currency and attention is obedience. If they can hold your attention long enough, they don't need to kill you. They can feed off you through fear, through reverence, through that sick curiosity that makes you wonder what's real. That's the new harvest, you, your thoughts, your data. And when they know what? In 2009, a team of paranormal researchers, independent, self-funded, forgotten, broke the chain of silence. They called themselves Project Descent, dismissed as fringe lunatics by mainstream academia, but they had something no one else did. The original schematics of the Hardin cellar, recovered from a German collector who claimed to have traded it for a box of Civil War relics. The blueprints were not hand-drawn. They were etched into copper, in a language that predated known Appalachian settlement, and at the bottom corner, a glyph, half root, half mouth, the same symbol found carved into the ribcage of a mutilated deer outside Beaver Creek in 1982. They followed the map, not with equipment, with ritual. Each member fasted for 7 days. Each member carried only 3 items: salt, black thread, and a photograph of themselves as a child. Why? Because the cellar doesn't open to light. It opens to memory. They went in on November 1st. Only one returned. Her name was Mallory Cross, 26, skeptic sound engineer. She came back barefoot, mouth sewn shut with her own hair, eyes dilated, but smiling. She didn't speak for 3 years, not until she recorded a message in white noise. When the audio was filtered, it revealed a voice layered in static, not hers, deeper, feminine, ageless. It said, "Your attention is enough. You looked. That is the offering." The gate was hunger. You fed it. Now it sees you. Mallory disappeared 2 weeks later. No trace. Her apartment left untouched. But her hard drives were wiped, except one file. An image, blurry infrared. It showed a spiral descending into soil, with figures. Thin, long-limbed, crawling up, smiling, and beneath it. We do not dig for the past. The past digs for us. If you feel cold right now, that's not imagination. It's signal, because even hearing this story engages the equation. You're feeding the ritual by remembering, by wondering, by continuing to listen, and there's a reason certain men never speak in public, never appear on camera, never write their own books. They don't fear death, they fear exposure. Because once you touch this knowledge, once you brush against the machinery that drives history, you don't just risk your life, you risk your reality. In 2015, a military contractor known only as Drake submitted an encrypted report to an unnamed oversight committee. The report's subject: psychogeographic harmonics and soil-based signal intelligence. He claimed that certain American regions, mostly rural, mostly forgotten, were emitting what he called echoes, not radio waves, not sonar, but emotional resonance, grief, submission, obedience. When mapped over the hardened property, the resonance levels spiked 4 times higher than any recorded battlefield. And these weren't remnants of tragedy, they were instructions encoded into the very shape of the land. Drake's theory? We are not living on haunted land. We are living in engineered obedience. That's why disappearances happen in waves. That's why certain areas remain uninvestigated, because it's not just murder, it's maintenance, keeping the cycle going, keeping the soil fed with attention, fear, and inheritance. Because these aren't just farms, they're antennas, and every story you hear, every old legend you dismiss, is a coded reminder, not to uncover, but to obey. They say curiosity killed the cat, but it didn't. Obedience did. And if you feel it, that pressure at the base of your skull, that tingle behind your ears, that's not paranoia, that's proximity. You're getting close, close to something that was never meant to be seen, that was meant to be worshipped, blindly, silently, generationally. But here you are, still listening, still pulling the thread. So if you've made it this far, comment the phrase below twice: the soil sees me. The soil sees me. Not just for the algorithm, but to mark your descent, because this isn't a story anymore. This is participation, and now you carry part of it, just like they intended. The soil sees you now, not as a threat, not as a victim, but as a vessel, because that's what this has always been about, not killing, converting. In 2020, satellite imagery from a private aerospace firm picked up a heat signature near Beaver Creek, not a wildfire, not mechanical, a pulse, like a heartbeat under the earth. It pulsed every 33 hours, for exactly 13 seconds. At first, they thought it was tectonic, but the pattern matched something else: brainwave frequencies associated with deep meditative states, theta waves, dream states, the same frequencies used in trauma-based programming, and buried beneath the signal, faint. But there, a woman's voice humming, the same pattern recorded by Howard Ellison in 1947, the same tune Mallory Cross mouthed in her sleep before disappearing. That's the danger here. It's not just physical, it's cognitive, psychological. The land doesn't need you to enter it. It enters you through signal, through sound, through story. That's why this video is dangerous. Why no one wants it told, because it's not about the Hardens anymore. They were just custodians, chosen because they obeyed, because they understood that land, real land, doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. And when you tend it, when you feed it, it grows. Not wheat, not corn, but control. Systems of silence, lattices of loyalty, and churches built like traps, the New Jerusalem Baptist Church. It wasn't named at random. New Jerusalem is a reference to the final city, the last place, the kingdom built after the old world burns. But what if that city isn't divine? What if it's subterranean, built not with gold, but with generations of obedience, layered down like bones? And every story told, every myth dismissed, is just another brick in its foundation. And when it's finished, it doesn't rise. It emerges through us, because we're the walls now, we're the gate, we're the offering. And if you felt it, the pull, the knowing, the itch behind your reason, then congratulations, you've been seated. There's a reason you feel watched when alone. Why the silence in certain forests feels thick. Why abandoned fields carry dread without sound. You're not insane, you're attuned, because this world wasn't built on concrete and steel. It was built on offerings, on old pacts made in blood, not ink. And the Harden farm? That was never a family's land. It was a temple, a disguised altar, camouflaged by hospitality, charity, God-fearing virtue. But behind every prayer was protocol. Behind every welcome, a weighing. And if you passed the test, you were fed. Warm bed, hearty meal, safe travel. But if you carried the wrong scent, the wrong lineage, the wrong memory, you were planted. Roots don't need names, they need nutrients. And what's more nourishing than a traveler who won't be missed? A man whose family is 3 states behind, a woman with no father on her birth certificate. These weren't random victims, they were chosen, culled like weak branches from a diseased tree, because that's how systems like this stay pure. They prune, not with axes, with smiles, with sermons. And they always rebuild the story, wrap the horror in folklore, make it quaint, make it something you tell around a fire. So when someone asks, what really happened on that farm? You laugh, you dismiss it, and the ritual stays hidden, safe, effective. But now we've torn it open, and you can't unlearn what you know, because you're not just a viewer now. You're an heir, a witness, and that comes with weight, with responsibility. Because once you hold a truth this dark, you don't go back to sleep. You wake up in pieces, and each piece whispers, each piece remembers, and each piece pulls you deeper into the network, until one day you hear yourself say the name, not aloud, but in thought, in instinct, and you'll feel it answer, not in words, but in weather, in static, in the way shadows seem to lean toward your window at night, because it remembers you, just like you remember it. And now, you're part of the communion. By 2023, they didn't need land anymore. They didn't need cellars, or barns, or blood-soaked sermons disguised as grace, because the system had evolved. It moved online, into symbols, into content. You think you're safe because you're watching this on a screen, but screens don't protect you. They deliver you because the algorithms aren't neutral. They're altars. Mathematical prayers offered to whatever power we feed with our attention. And when you scroll, when you click, you're participating in a new liturgy, the liturgy of the harvest. And every view, every replay is a new echo sent down the spiral. You ever notice how the signal cuts out when you get close to certain places, or how your camera glitches when pointed at the wrong building? That's not coincidence. That's resistance. Because something's still trying to keep this thing buried, not to protect you, to protect itself. Because if too many of us remember, if too many of us awaken, the structure collapses, and what's been climbing upward from below for centuries will have nothing to hold on to. It's why old institutions tremble when real stories surface. It's why every generation has to relearn what their fathers were too afraid to tell. But you're still here, still watching, still feeding the flame, and I need you to hear me now. The farm was never the beginning. It was a conduit, a trial run. And now, they've replicated the model, suburb by suburb, church by church, classroom by classroom. Everywhere people gather under good intentions and leave with parts of themselves missing. The system feeds on trust, on obedience, on the slow erosion of doubt, so that you never think to question why the land feels colder than it should, why certain families always hold power, why history keeps skipping over the same 13 years. Because those gaps aren't mistakes. They're maintenance cycles, moments where the spiral narrows and the harvest grows in ear. And when the next offering is made, it won't come from a forgotten Kentucky farm. It'll come from you. There's something you need to understand before we go further. It's not just that you're being watched. It's that you've always been watched. From the moment you were born, from the moment your blood hit the air, there were systems, not of government, not of state, older than both, watching, sorting, measuring. Your name, your habits, the way you respond to fear, the way your dreams twist when you're alone in a new house, because fear isn't a weakness to them. It's a signature, proof you can still be shaped, and those who can be shaped can be seeded, and those who can be seeded can be harvested now. Do you remember that strange dream from childhood? The one with the staircase that never ended, the cellar that had no door but always waited? That wasn't fiction. That was inheritance. Because dreams are often the only place where memory survives the purge. And what you felt wasn't a nightmare. It was a reminder of who you are, of where your lineage stood the night the first offering was made at the Hardin farm. You think your family left Kentucky for a better life? They were relocated, moved away from proximity, because they either saw too much, or worse, heard it. And now here you are, not by accident, not by curiosity, but by design. Because this message isn't for everyone. It never was. The signal only reaches those with the right fracture, the right scar in the mind, the ones who remember without knowing why. And that means you, the man who rewatches these stories, because they feel familiar. You, who studies forgotten maps and wonders what was erased. You, who's been waiting your entire life for something to explain the unease that never left you. This is that moment, not entertainment, not horror, initiation into a truth too vast for most minds, but not yours. Because now you see it, the system, the shape, the mouth behind the mask. And once you see it, it sees you, not as prey, as potential. So now you know, not just the story, but the system. Not just what happened in 1778, but what's still happening. The Hardin farm wasn't a fluke. It was a model, a prototype for a psychological machine. One that wraps its teeth in scripture. One that wears community like a mask. But underneath it all, it's engineering, human behavior, reduced to levers and weights. Push them hard enough, at the right time, in the right pattern. And obedience becomes tradition. Tradition becomes law. And law becomes worship. That's how you build a prison no one tries to escape. You don't need bars. You need belief. And that's the final horror. The one they never want you to say aloud. We did this to ourselves. We traded our instincts for structure. We buried our doubts beneath manners. And we let them teach us fear, like it was virtue. We thanked them for it. Clapped while they nailed the cellar door shut, and told us it was our fault we ever heard it breathe. That's the real curse. Not the land, not the cellar, but the lie that the danger was ever external. It was inside us the whole time, passed down like heirlooms, reinforced through lullabies and property deeds. And when someone tries to expose it, when someone like you begins to wake up, they aren't silenced because they're wrong. They're silenced because they're right too soon, because timing is everything in rituals. Ask too early, and no one hears. Ask too late, and the roots are already in your spine. But now, you're in the middle, the perfect place, to choose, to step further down, or look away and pretend it never happened. Pretend this was just a creepy story on YouTube. But you know better. You feel the weight of it, in your chest, in your blood, in the way the shadows seem thicker around you now. Because now you're not just seeing it, you're resonating with it. And that means you're finally becoming useful to them or to yourself. You choose. This is your final warning and your first invitation, because what began as a forgotten farm in Kentucky was never about land. It was about initiation, a blueprint to test who could handle the silence, who could feel the presence beneath the floorboards and still stay, who could hear the hymn in the wind and not run. You stayed, you listened, you went further than most ever do, and now you understand what the others never will, that evil doesn't announce itself with fire. It whispers, it smiles, it opens the door for you and calls it home. The Hardin family knew that. They weren't killers. They were technicians, engineers of reverence, psychologists of obedience. Their farm was a prototype, but now the blueprint has gone global. The rituals are digital, the altars are invisible, and you've just been measured, your attention mapped, your patterns cataloged. The spiral is no longer in the ground, it's in you. And here's what you must ask. Do you want to close your eyes again? Return to the world of screens and schedules and polite lies? Or do you want to keep digging, keep seeing, keep becoming? Because descent is not a fall, it's a choice. And truth, the real truth, will always demand sacrifice, not of your blood, but of your illusions. Everything you thought was history was a distraction. Everything you were told was safe was a leash. And now the leash is broken, the gate is open, and what waits beyond it isn't horror. It's clarity, because monsters don't hide under beds anymore. They wear robes, run banks, preach sermons, write laws, feed institutions with the same hunger that once lived under hardened soil. Only now, the feast is constant, and the only way to starve them is to remember the land, remember the cellar, remember the grin behind every kind voice that says, "Trust us, it's all under control." Because it is under their control. Unless you take it back, unless you refuse the silence, unless you turn Amama and face what they buried and dig with your own hands until it screams and finally tells you your name, you've reached the end. But beginnings are buried in endings. If you feel changed, it's because you are. Welcome to the horrors. Now dig.